The entire auditorium held its breath as Malcolm Rivers set his pencil down, 45 minutes early, his nonlinear solution already complete while PhDs from MIT were still lost in the first steps. Judges huddled, whispering in disbelief, eyes wide as they realized what they were seeing wasn't just brilliance, it was history rewriting itself. And at the center of it all sat a 17-year-old in a black hoodie, silent but undeniable. It was the first cold Monday morning of the semester at the University of Pennsylvania, and the sky outside was painted a dull, grayish blue, casting a shadow over the ivy-covered buildings of the old campus. Inside the massive glass-paneled lecture hall of advanced applied mathematics, the sharp glow of overhead fluorescent lights glinted off polished wooden desks and steel fixtures. More than 200 students filled the tiered rows, their voices a soft murmur of nervous anticipation as they prepared for what was famously one of the most unforgiving classes in the department, taught by none other than Professor Evelyn Hargrove, a woman whose reputation for brilliance was matched only by her intolerance for mediocrity. In the back third of the room, seated with a slight slouch and his hood half drawn over his head, was Malcolm Rivers. 17 years old. Thin but tall, with deep brown skin and eyes that rarely wandered far from his notebook. He wore a plain black hoodie, well-worn jeans, and a scuffed backpack that had clearly seen better days. He hadn't spoken to anyone since he entered the room. He didn't check his phone. He didn't try to make friends. He just quietly flipped open his notebook, every page inside filled with pristine handwriting, organized, color-coded, as if mathematics were not just numbers to him, but a language he had been fluent in since birth. He didn't look like much, not to the other students anyway. Not to the professors seated in the front row either. A few of them, older men in suits and ties, were visiting faculty from nearby institutions, here to observe Hargrove's legendary welcome lecture. This was the day she separated those who could survive her class from those who couldn't. She didn't grade on a curve. She didn't give extensions. And if you couldn't keep up, well, that was your problem, not hers. Her goal wasn't to teach everyone. It was to eliminate the weak. Professor Hargrove entered the room with the authority of a general walking onto a battlefield. Her heels clicked across the tiled floor, echoing sharply with each step. She was a woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun, sharp glasses that caught the light like knives, and a tailored navy blazer that radiated power. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The room fell into immediate silence. As she reached the podium, she paused and scanned the room. Not quickly, not carelessly, but with slow, deliberate precision, as if she were already taking inventory of who belonged and who didn't. When her gaze passed over Malcolm, there was the briefest flicker of something cold and unreadable in her expression. Just a flicker. Then she moved on, set her notes down, and picked up a piece of chalk. Last semester, she began, her voice crisp and unyielding, we covered multidimensional limits and divergence fields. This semester, we begin with Laplace transforms. If you struggle to keep up, that is your cue to leave. She turned and began writing. Complex equations began to fill the board in tight, elegant strokes. Laplace operators. Integrals with non-trivial boundaries. Transform identities. Some students leaned forward, furiously scribbling down notes, already behind by the second line. Others stared blankly, lost before the lecture had even begun. Malcolm didn't move. His pen remained still. His eyes calmly scanned each line on the board. He wasn't memorizing, he was analyzing. Visualizing. The math flowed through him like water. But then, his eyes narrowed slightly. Something was off. A minor slip in the transformation step. It wouldn't change anything right away, but left unchecked, it would make the final result completely invalid. He glanced around. No one else seemed to notice. Most were still struggling to copy down the first half of the equation. The professors in the front row looked pleased. Except Malcolm. He kept staring at that one error. He hesitated. He knew who Hargrove was. She didn't tolerate correction, especially not from a first-year student, especially not from someone who looked like him. He had felt the eyes when he walked in this morning. The subtle glances. The unspoken questions. What's he doing here? Did he get in on a scholarship? Is he even in the right class? But something in his chest burned at the thought of letting it go. He wasn't raised to stay silent when he knew the truth. He took a deep breath, raised his hand, and calmly said, "Professor, I believe there's a mistake in the transformation step." The air in the room snapped. Hargrove froze mid-sentence, the chalk pausing on the board. Slowly, she turned to face the class, her eyes narrowing slightly as they settled on Malcolm. "A mistake," she repeated, the word like ice. Some students exchanged amused glances. Others leaned forward. One of the visiting professors in the front row smirked and whispered something to the man beside him. A few quiet chuckles rippled through the class. "Yes," Malcolm replied, voice steady. "The coefficient was introduced prematurely during the transform. It changes the weighting function." Hargrove didn't blink. She turned slowly back to the board and steadied her own work. Then, without looking at him, she extended the chalk in his direction. "Then by all means," she said, her voice deceptively polite. "Come and fix it." A ripple went through the room. This was no invitation. This was a test. A trap. Malcolm rose from his seat with quiet confidence, walked down the steps toward the board, and took the chalk from her hand. For a moment, the two of them stood side by side, an aging academic icon and a teenage freshman barely old enough to vote. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His chalk began to move. Smooth. Steady. Line after line. Erasing the mistake. Correcting the coefficients. Completing the transformation with a more elegant, simplified solution that made several students blink in surprise. Even one of the guest professors leaned forward, intrigued. When Malcolm stepped back, he didn't look at Hargrove. He simply placed the chalk back in the tray and returned to his seat. The silence in the room was absolute. Hargrove stared at the board, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. Not to him. Not to anyone. But it was enough. She picked up her chalk and continued the lecture as if nothing had happened. But something had. Malcolm Rivers, the boy in the hoodie no one had noticed when he walked in, had just rewritten the tone of the entire semester in under 5 minutes. No one laughed anymore. No one whispered. Because now, they were all watching him. Malcolm Rivers walked back to his seat in absolute silence, his steps steady, the weight of 200 eyes pressing against his shoulders, not with ridicule, but with something new, something sharper. Awareness. Respect. Even fear. He didn't glance sideways. He didn't smirk. He didn't need to. The math spoke for him. And the math had just silenced the room. Professor Evelyn Hargrove continued her lecture with cool precision, but anyone paying attention could sense the subtle tension in her shoulders. Her chalk paused an extra second between lines now, her tone a shade colder. Malcolm's correction hadn't just exposed a mistake, it had disrupted her authority. For someone like Hargrove, that wasn't just a misstep. It was a declaration of war. The class ended 20 minutes later, but the buzz in the hallway lingered far longer. Whispers followed Malcolm as he exited the building, not mocking this time, but murmurs of disbelief. Who is he? Did you see how fast he solved it? That was a doctoral-level move. But Malcolm didn't engage. He slipped on his headphones and walked straight to the campus library, his mind already anticipating what Hargrove might throw at him next. And she didn't disappoint. 2 days later, the lecture hall filled with a strange, nervous energy. Students leaned in, laptops open, notebooks ready, but there was something different in the air, like everyone was waiting for something to explode. Hargrove entered with her usual sharp click of heels, but this time she didn't open with a greeting or a warm-up. She went straight to the board and began writing an equation. It started simple, recognizable variables, familiar symbols, but as she continued, the equation grew more complex, unfolding into layers of nested integrals, multivariable transforms, and nonlinear terms that sent ripples of panic through the room. Her strokes were swift, confident, and unrelenting. When she stepped aside, the board was a battlefield. "This," she said, her voice smooth like polished glass, "isn't from your textbook. It's not even from your syllabus. It's a doctoral-level system from a theoretical study in non-equilibrium systems." She turned, her eyes sweeping across the class like a blade. "Any of you who think you're ready for this field, now is the time to prove it." Her eyes paused, only for a fraction of a second, on Malcolm. It was a challenge, no, an ambush. Students exchanged nervous looks. One girl's hand shook slightly as she tried to copy the problem. In the middle of the room, Malcolm sat completely still. Then, slowly, he raised his hand. Hargrove's brow arched just slightly. "Yes, Mr. Rivers?" "I'd like to take a shot at it," he said, standing without waiting for approval. Again, the lecture hall tilted into silence. The students parted like waves as Malcolm walked toward the board. Hargrove stepped back, arms crossed, watching every move. Malcolm stared at the problem for a few seconds, reading each line as if decoding a foreign language. Then he picked up the chalk. And he began to write. Not with hesitation. Not with guesswork. But with the sharp, clean confidence of someone who had already solved it in his head. He reorganized terms. Introduced a new substitution. Applied a transform that collapsed a page worth of terms into a compact structure that left even the visiting professors in the front row leaning forward, eyes wide. He wasn't just solving it, he was simplifying it. Teaching it. Rewriting it in real time. When he stepped back 10 minutes later, the final line shimmered beneath the chalk dust like a signature on a masterpiece. Hargrove stared at it for a long time. Then she turned to him, her face unreadable. "Interesting approach," she said dryly. "Unconventional. But correct." Malcolm nodded once and returned to his seat. For the rest of the class, no one said a word. But the storm was already brewing. Because as the lecture ended and students packed their bags, Hargrove made a rare announcement. "Before you go," she said, raising her voice above the rustle of backpacks and zippers, "I have a proposition, an invitation, really. The National Collegiate Mathematics Invitational is next month. It's a competition held between the top mathematical institutions in the country, MIT, Princeton, Caltech, Stanford. It's the highest stage you'll ever face as a student. Most of you aren't ready." She let that sink in. "But one of you might be." Her eyes fell directly on Malcolm. "Mr. Rivers, if you're as capable as you believe, I'd like to see what you can do in front of the country's best." The class went dead quiet. Someone dropped their pen and didn't bother picking it up. Malcolm looked up, eyes steady. "I accept," he said simply. And just like that, the battle moved to a new arena. From that day on, Malcolm became a fixture in the university library. From dawn till long past sunset, he camped out in a quiet corner with stacks of journals, problem sets, competition archives, and coffee-stained notebooks. He used timers, solved problems under pressure, studied past champions' techniques. He wasn't just training, he was transforming. He attacked problems with relentless energy, rewriting derivations, testing the limits of transform theory, and building new shortcuts most students wouldn't even dream of. Some nights he didn't leave until campus security asked him to. During those weeks, whispers about him spread like wildfire. Some students watched him with admiration. Others with envy. A few with resentment. There were rumors that he was a prodigy, that he'd hacked the test database, that he wasn't even human. But Malcolm ignored it all. He didn't need validation. He was chasing something bigger, a reckoning. Even Hargrove noticed. A week before the competition, she delivered a packet to his desk without a word. Inside were 5 unpublished problems used to train doctoral candidates in theoretical physics. The message was clear: survive. This, and maybe you belong. Malcolm solved them all in 3 nights. Even his closest classmate, a Vietnamese-American student named Vin who'd been watching him work, shook his head in disbelief. "You're not just trying to win," he said one evening. "You're trying to prove a point." Malcolm didn't even look up from the page. "I don't have to prove anything," he replied. "I just want them to see it for themselves." On the eve of the competition, Malcolm stood outside the lecture hall, staring up at the university's clock tower. The wind was sharp. The sky was clear. And for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to pause. Tomorrow wasn't just about math. It was about everything he carried into that room, the weight of being underestimated, misjudged, overlooked. It was about showing that brilliance doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs a moment. And Malcolm Rivers was ready to take it. The night before the National Collegiate Mathematics Invitational was quiet, but inside Malcolm Rivers' mind, the silence was anything but still. The wind whispered against the window panes of his dorm as the lights of Philadelphia flickered in the distance, each one a reminder of how far he had come and how far he had yet to go. His notes were spread across the bed, his textbooks dog-eared and lined with annotations, but he wasn't studying anymore. He didn't need to. After a month of pushing himself past every limit, grinding through impossibly dense problems, simulating real-time competitions with stopwatches and obscure proofs, Malcolm had crossed the threshold. The knowledge was no longer just in his head, it was in his bones. As he lay back and stared at the ceiling, he thought of what Professor Hargrove had said when she issued the challenge: "If you think you belong at the table with the best, prove it." But Malcolm wasn't here to prove that he belonged. He was here to show that the table wasn't built just for them, it could be flipped. The next morning, the University of Chicago auditorium was alive with quiet intensity. Polished hardwood floors gleamed beneath sharp beams of light. Rows of faculty, judges, and spectators sat poised with notepads, some already whispering about the rankings, about who might win. Teams from MIT, Stanford, Princeton, Berkeley, they were all here. And then, there was Malcolm. Alone. No blazer. No sponsor. No entourage. Just a 17-year-old kid in a black hoodie with a graphing calculator clipped to the inside of his worn backpack and a notebook filled with numbers that had kept him company when no one else did. When he walked into the hall, a few people glanced his way and looked back down just as quickly, assuming he was someone's younger sibling or a volunteer. No one expected anything. Which was exactly how Malcolm liked it. The first round began with a warm-up problem. The warm-up was a relative term. It was a multivariable integral with rotating frames, something that would have made most students sweat in a final exam. But not Malcolm. His pencil moved like it was tracing a blueprint he'd already memorized. While others double-checked their assumptions, he streamlined his path. When the buzzer rang, Malcolm had already leaned back in his seat, arms folded, eyes scanning the room, not with arrogance, but with clarity. The second round was worse. A transformation matrix that led into a Fourier series disguised beneath an applied mechanics scenario. Someone from Caltech let out an audible sigh midway through. The MIT team leaned in together, arguing quietly over vector alignment. But Malcolm, still working solo, cracked it before most teams reached the halfway mark. His answer wasn't just correct, it was elegant, a minimalistic path of logic that made a judge raise an eyebrow and murmur something to the scorer beside him. By round 3, the room knew his name. Students started glancing toward him after each buzzer, lips tight with frustration. Some teams huddled closer. A few shook their heads in disbelief. Malcolm didn't gloat. He just sat still, one hand resting on his notebook, the other steady on his pencil. The fourth round arrived like a storm. The question unfolded on the overhead screen, a nonlinear differential equation nested within a dynamic system simulation. It was a monster, the kind of problem designed to eliminate even the best contenders. MIT's lead student immediately leaned forward, eyes burning, and started scribbling. Stanford's team captain adjusted his glasses, already biting his lip. Malcolm stared at the screen for 10 full seconds, blinking only once. Then, he smiled, not because it was easy, but because he had seen a way through the chaos. He flipped his page and began writing. His method didn't follow the expected route. He rearranged the terms, sidestepped the brute force that most students were defaulting to, and instead introduced a change of variables that instantly collapsed the problem's complexity. His solution wasn't just accurate, it was devastatingly efficient. He dropped his pencil, flipped the page back, and waited. Stillness wrapped around him. The MIT student was still deep in the weeds, muttering to himself. Across the room, one judge was now openly pointing at Malcolm's paper, whispering to another. The timer beeped. Round over. When the judges began reviewing submissions, they paused at Malcolm's. The room waited, quiet as glass. A moment later, a judge stood and spoke into the microphone. Mr. Malcolm Rivers of the University of Pennsylvania has provided a fully correct solution and presented an optimized path that improves upon the official answer key. The room broke into murmurs. Some clapped. Others sat stunned. But then came the final challenge. A single question. One shot. 45 minutes. Winner take all. The question appeared like a hammer dropping from the sky. A multilayered, nested nonlinear partial differential equation tied into probabilistic boundary conditions. It was a graduate-level nightmare, something only a handful of theoretical mathematicians in the country could tackle. One student in the back stood up and walked out. Another dropped his head into his hands. Malcolm didn't move. His pencil hovered. One breath. Two. Then he began. Line after line flowed onto the page. Integrals uncoiled. Substitutions slid into place. Transformations emerged like pieces of music fitting into a perfect rhythm. While others stopped to recalculate, Malcolm never lifted his hand. He didn't hesitate. He didn't doubt. He had trained for this moment, not just to win a competition, but to leave no question, no excuse, no way to be ignored. 35 minutes in, he set down his pencil. He didn't need the last 10. The judges spent the next 15 minutes huddled around his paper. By the time they looked up, something had shifted in the room. And then, with quiet ceremony, the head judge stepped to the microphone and spoke clearly. The winner of this year's National Collegiate Mathematics Invitational is Malcolm Rivers. The words hit like a thunderclap. The room stood. Some cheered. Some froze. But no one looked surprised anymore. Because what they had just witnessed couldn't be denied. Malcolm remained seated for a moment, breathing slow. Then he stood, calm and composed. He didn't pump his fists. He didn't bow. He just nodded once toward the judges and walked out of the hall, hoodie still on, the storm he'd brought still echoing in every stunned silence behind him. When he returned to Professor Hargrove's lecture the next day, the class sat unusually quiet. No one stared. No one smirked. When Hargrove entered, she didn't pause, didn't break stride, but when she glanced at Malcolm sitting in the same seat as always, she hesitated. Just for a beat. And when she spoke that morning, it wasn't with defiance. It was with recognition. She didn't say congratulations. She didn't offer an apology. But she didn't have to. The silence said everything. Because in that room, in that moment, everyone knew Malcolm Rivers had not just won a contest. He had shattered a boundary. He had rewritten what was possible. And he had done it in the one language no one could argue with, mathematics. As the author of Malcolm Rivers' story, I want to take a moment to step back, not just from the numbers and chalkboards, but from the deeper message that lives within the silence after the applause. Malcolm's journey wasn't about solving equations faster than anyone else. It wasn't just about math competitions or outsmarting a brilliant professor. It was about something far more universal, the struggle to be seen for who you truly are in a world that often judges before it listens. Too often, people, especially young people of color, are underestimated before they even get a chance to speak. Their brilliance is questioned. Their presence is challenged. Their potential is buried under layers of bias and assumption. But as Malcolm showed us, talent doesn't ask for permission. And when it's paired with discipline, humility, and courage, it becomes impossible to ignore. Malcolm didn't succeed because he wanted revenge or recognition. He succeeded because he knew who he was, and he was willing to put in the work when no one was watching. He understood that being gifted is one thing, but proving it takes grit. He faced challenges that weren't written in any textbook: the weight of expectations, the sting of prejudice, and the pressure to be perfect just to be treated as equal. And still, he rose. Quietly. Steadily. Powerfully. So here's the lesson: your worth is not defined by the eyes that doubt you, it's defined by the truth you carry within. Whether you're sitting in the back of a classroom, walking into a boardroom, or stepping onto any stage where you feel out of place, remember this: you don't have to be loud to be heard. You just have to be undeniable. To every young mind listening right now, sharpen your skills, stay grounded in who you are, and never let anyone else decide your ceiling. Sometimes the best response to doubt isn't anger, it's excellence. And to our audience here at US Daily Story, thank you. Thank you for watching, for believing in stories that reflect both the injustice and the triumph of everyday people. If Malcolm's story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue to tell stories that matter, stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us all that brilliance has no uniform, no accent, and certainly no color. We appreciate you. And remember, the world may try to put you in a box, but you were never meant to fit inside one anyway. Keep shining. Keep proving them wrong, quietly, relentlessly, and with grace.